Last week we considered the origins and history of the Eucharist, minding how what Jesus did at the Last Supper is the origin, but how the Mass for its part developed over time, but remained very consistent for many, many centuries within our Church's history. But what are the essential elements of the Eucharist, its matter and form as we call it, and what are its primary effects? It is these that we will look at here. When it comes to the matter and the form of the Eucharist, we need look no further than the Last Supper. Jesus, of course, within the context of the Passover meal, which included only unleavened bread, as there was to be no leaven at table, it was this unleavened bread that he took, and he said to his apostles, "Take this and eat, for this is my body." And then likewise, the cup of common grape wine, he said, "Take and drink, for this is the chalice of my blood of the new covenant." And we, for our part, when we look at Jesus' own use of unleavened bread and wine, recognize these as the proper matter of the sacraments. It is only unleavened bread made from wheat flour and water that is able to be used. And it even says in the Church's guidelines that it should be recently baked, so it should be relatively fresh, but only of water and flour, wheat flour. And accordingly, this is a very important and definitive recipe, and we cannot be adding other things to it. It is only this, so that it is truly that which Jesus himself would have used. But likewise with the wine, it must be wine of pure grapes, and they can be white grapes or red grapes, but we cannot have any additives to the wine of other types of fruit, let's say, and there must be proper alcohol content so that it is real wine. And so grape juice is not truly a valid matter for the Eucharist. So unleavened bread and wine, these are the elements that are taken at every Mass, and through the words of institution at the consecration, the very words that Jesus used at the Last Supper, these become his body and blood. For the priest, he stands in Jesus' place, and we will talk more about this when we cover holy orders, of course. But inasmuch as that priest has been ordained to offer the sacrifice, it is Jesus that is offering the sacrifice. The priest, the human being, standing in his place and doing it as Jesus being made present in that moment. And accordingly, these are the essential elements: the unleavened bread, the grape wine, the validly ordained priest, carrying out the ritual in the very way that Holy Mother Church has handed down for us. Now, as for the effects of the Eucharist, the Catechism of the Catholic Church goes into several effects. Among them is the reality that, of course, we receive Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity, his real presence, as our words of description would call it. That it is not just merely a symbol or a reminder, but it really becomes Jesus' body and blood. And it is a great miracle, each and every Mass, the priest taking the bread and the wine and pronouncing those words of institution. That bread and wine are changing. They are no longer bread and wine. And so it is an error, sometimes an innocent one, admittedly, but nonetheless an error for us to talk about receiving communion as bread or wine. For that is simply the appearances. What we receive is Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity, his very life that is given to us, though under the appearances of bread and wine, so that you and I can rightly receive them into our bodies, eating and drinking them. Because, of course, and many do believe that we in the Catholic Church somehow subscribe to cannibalism. You can find this all over the internet or in those who write little tracts. They think we are cannibals. But Jesus himself said in John chapter 6, "My flesh is true food and my blood is true drink." And so it is that we want to recognize the great gift, mystery, and yes, miracle that when those words are pronounced, the bread and the wine in their very substance, what they are, these change. The appearances remain the same. And this is why we have used for many centuries now the word transubstantiation to describe this mystery, how the substance, the what the thing is, changes, but the characteristics, or what they more properly call the accidents of bread and wine, these remain the same, so that we can truly and quite honestly, pleasantly receive them in a way that is quite natural. And so it is at the very heart of the effects of the Eucharist that we receive Jesus himself, his body, blood, soul, and divinity into ours. And like all real food, it is assimilated. But in a sense, it's Jesus who is assimilating us, as we are becoming all the more united to him, and please God, all the more united to any others who partake fully of the Eucharist in a worthy manner. And we will talk about this more in a later video, worthy reception of Holy Communion. But the fact is, we are meant to be in unity with one another. And the Eucharist, as a profession of faith, that when we partake of the Eucharist, we are saying our amen, not only to the truth that it is the real presence of Jesus, but to all that Holy Mother Church teaches and professes as true. This draws us into greater unity, a visible unity, because obviously we visibly receive communion when we ourselves and those who are with us at the same Mass receive. There is an outward sign of unity that is being carried out. And so we want to recognize this as a very important effect. But we also want to underscore that there are other effects of receiving communion. And these include such graces and gifts as being strengthened against the near occasion of sin, and even forgiven of our venial sins. Of course, our forgiveness of mortal sins, serious sins, most properly happens in the sacrament of penance. But we, for our part, do believe that venial sins are forgiven through receiving the Eucharist. And then there are other effects as well that pertain to our way of living, our discipleship in Jesus Christ, how receiving the Eucharist commits us to the poor, for example, and to lives of charity. And so these effects, and there are several listed in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, are all important. But I want to stress above all, the greatest effect is that being brought into deeper union and communion with Christ through his very real presence, through what he himself wills to give us, that we are assimilated all the more into his body, and that we become all the more perfectly united to him and to all who believe. And so these are the key effects. So next time we will look at the minister of communion as well as the recipient, minding again the great gift that the Eucharist is, minding how it is the sacrament of the sacraments, minding how it is the very source and summit of the Christian life, meant as a foretaste of the kingdom of heaven. May God bless you.